Great. So, so this session is called "What Works for Whom" and how do we know it? I view this kind of session as kind of setting the stage as to kind of what is the evidence on what has been, kind of demonstrated to work, what we know to work, know not to work, and how to do that. I think there are two key words that I know should be coming out of our conversation. One is the issue of segmentation. And I think Brian already kind of alluded to that in his introductory remark. Kind of the population that we are talking about is not, homogeneous. So when we think about what works, I think we want to think about what works for which particular subsegment of this population. Segmentation should also be coming out of a conversation when thinking about the other side, the firm that are hiring, and probably what works for a big firm may be quite different from what might be working for a smaller firm. And the second key word besides segmentation is really about data. What is the data that exists? What has been used? What is missing? So I hope that's what we can achieve with this conversation. So I think the way I'm going to do it, maybe I'll start with Jeff, is just ask you the question, kind of what do we know?
Sure.
Works for whom, and how do we know it?
Right, and I think to the how do we know it, there's what we know works and what we have academic evidence for that could be used to encourage others to be fair chance employers. What we know works is that when employers go about this with intentionality, that they intentionally are seeking out this population as a talent pool and critically partner with typically community-based organizations to provide both the filtering of who's ready to work and be a good fit, as well as the kind of support that people with criminal records typically need because they've lived lives marginalized by deep poverty and lack of mentorship. The problem is we don't have much academic evidence of that. It's just a collection of anecdotes, and while the plural of anecdote is not data, it's so consistent and so widespread across geography and industries. There's a high degree of confidence, but nothing to convince someone. So people like me who are out there advocating the business community end up using things like Johns Hopkins, citing Johns Hopkins. It's one page off of a PowerPoint deck from 20 plus years ago.
What's on that slide?
It's a Johns Hopkins hospital system hired, at the time, roughly 500 people with criminal records, had a very good experience with them. Not all of them lasted in the job, but none were fired for anything problematic or anything directly related to criminal records. So that's widely cited, but it's one page 20 years ago, delivered by an executive of Johns Hopkins. That's the kind of evidence you come across. So there's a very good academic study that used the Freedom of Information Act to pull military records, and people with felony exemptions who were able to enter the military achieve the rank of non-commissioned officer, like a sergeant, faster than those that didn't. So there's pieces here and there, but nothing that you could present to a business owner today and say, look, here's a really well-studied, well-constructed example. The other thing I'll mention quickly is there's a lot of statistics that we in the advocacy community use that are wildly dated. So the 27% unemployment rate for people with who've been incarcerated, the north of 50, there are two studies, one's like 60%, one's 70% unemployment rate in the first year out of incarceration. Those came out in a very different economic environment. And I know those numbers have improved, but I have no idea how much. And using 20-year-old, 10-year-old data from a completely different employment market is meaningless.
Stan, same question.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, Jeff and I know each other really well. We have a lot of conversations around this topic. So there's two things that I would add. The first thing that works really, really well is getting C-suite buy-in, which is absolutely necessary. If you want to make any type of dent, whether it's in a single organization or in a consortium of organizations, you need buy-in from the C-suite. It has to come from your CEO or your CHRO. The second thing that I think is really important is connecting this work to real business needs. We were able to really set up the Second Chance Business Coalition, and I was able to get my organization's attention.
Can you say a few things about the organization? Yeah. I think just to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Jump back in time for an old man.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that.
So in 2020, I work for a company called Eaton Corporation. If you're not familiar, it's probably the most important corporation that you've never heard of and that you interact with on a daily basis. Roughly 80,000 employees all around the world. The business is split in two separate areas. The first is electrical components, everything from circuit breakers to transformers. The other part of the business is making component parts for airplanes and vehicles. I raised that to underscore that second chance hiring was not at the top of the mind for this organization, particularly in 2020 when we were dealing with the pandemic, supply shortages, social justice issues with the murder of George Floyd. And the reason why this became an issue for our CEO, Craig Arnold, was he was a part of the Business Roundtable. He was asked to step in and co-chair or chair the Equitable Justice Subcommittee, which had two roles. One was focusing on police reform, and the second was looking at fair chance hiring from a policy perspective. The reason why data is so important was I got the task with explain this. Because this wasn't a mission critical for our operation, but it was, hey Stan, we have to go do this, explain this, make it make sense. And I just dove into every single publication that was out there, every research paper to explain it and really help our leadership understand how could we advocate from a policy perspective. Here's the wonderful thing about that. When we got down to it, we realized that we didn't have to wait on Washington to make a dent in this space. There were things that we could do as an organization. And so as a part of that work, and you'll hear from Dan Gibson from JP Morgan Chase, Craig Arnold and the CEO of JP Morgan Chase decided, well, I think this is probably an opportunity for us to band together as corporations to really send a market signal that this is important work and that corporations cannot sit on the sideline here. We have to lead in this space. And so, I'll leave it to Nan to really talk about the progression of the Second Chance Business Coalition, but at its core, it's a number of multinational corporations with operations all around the world who are focused on saying, we want to be known as fair chance employers. We're going to do the work internally to make our processes available and let people know that we want to hire them and kind of make that cultural shift. So that's the piece of it.
Can you say a bit more about what, in the spirit of kind of this panel, kind of what has been learned from this work? So you've done all this work. You must have collected data and evidence.
Yeah.
From what Jeff was saying, it sounds like more of this kind of trickling up to becoming, kind of publicly available. So what has been learned and how come, as a public, as a community that cares about this, we maybe not have shared much of that learning?
So I'd say there's two major learnings, and there's a number of folks in this room who can speak to this. The first thing that every major household brand corporation is worried about is what is the potential impact to my reputation? Are my customers, are they going to be concerned, or is my employee base going to be worried about this? And so if you look at the Second Chance Business Coalition today, you have roughly 50 case studies that will clearly demonstrate to you that this is not a reputational risk. Creating opportunities for people who are focused on getting back into the labor force is not a reputational risk. In fact, what we have seen is that your employee base gets really excited because there is someone in their family, someone who they care about deeply, who is looking for that second chance. And so what I would encourage people to lean in on and use that kind of coalition and some of those members to focus on is like, this kind of looking between your fingers on, if I talk about this, is my employee base going to be upset or my customer base going to be upset? The answer is no. The second thing that's really important, and it's going to be a theme of what you hear today, is the difficulty with data. Not just sharing it, because I think a lot of the focus is on, wow, we really wish these corporations would open up in the books and share it. Spoiler alert, they don't have it. They don't have it. And when they do have it, it's the product of an extensive amount of manual work. And if you want to talk to anybody at any level of any corporation, what type of work that they don't want to do? It's manual work. Even if that manual work is not breaking bricks, but it's pulling spreadsheets together to pull data from various sources to tell you how they're doing on this road path. So I'll leave it there.
Can I just go ahead?
Yeah. I just want to also add to something Stan said, because you brought up segmentation. Middle market businesses in general have been leading this more than Fortune 500.
That's true.
And their concerns are different. There are probably more revolve around negligent hiring liability. Because if, I'm not going to pick on a major corporation, ABC, has a problem, it gets thrown to the legal department. They have outside counsel on retainer. if you're a business owner of 300 employees and you get sued for negligent hiring liability, it's going to take up all your time. Every dollar spent in defense is essentially coming out of your pocket as a private business owner. And it's a so there is differences among the business community based on size, private ownership versus public ownership, among other factors.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Just one more question before I move to Amanda. The data that they don't have, the corporation, is what? Obviously, they have a sense of how well the employees are doing at the job, whether they are staying, whether they are performing. Is it the criminal record data that they don't have?
Yeah.
What is the bit that's missing? If they wanted to learn more from the experiments, from the work they're doing, is it the criminal record data that is missing?
Yeah, it's a couple of different things. You got me in the hot seat, both literally and
I'm
figuratively.
sorry,
The sun hitting the back of my head. It's not good being bald with the sun around you. So I'd say the difficulty with the data is it is an unintended consequence of trying to do the right thing. So let's start where, let's go back to where this starts. Yeah. If you think about the hiring process, if you are doing it the way, in the spirit in which you want to do it, the employer doesn't want to know about whether or not someone has a criminal record. And in fact, it's a dynamic process, because what employers are doing who are trying to do the right thing is they're restricting what is the type of activity that are hitting the background check that I won't even know about. So there's a lot of stuff, there are a lot of people who are getting hired, we don't even have no idea. Yeah. And then to the extent that there is a look at someone who they're hitting your background check and you're asked to find additional information, that's a segmented group. That's not the hiring manager. That's not like kind of your core HR team that's looking at that data. So right out the jump, there's a whole stream of data that your employer is not seeing unless they go to the third-party background check company and ask for it. So that's step number one. And then step number two is, we might assign you, once you're hired, a worldwide ID, but that worldwide ID doesn't have a yellow color to it. We don't care. If you're in the organization, I'm not following you, I'm not tracking you. And so there's a problem on the front end in terms of we're not collecting all that data and keeping it. And then there's a problem on the back end of saying, well, when these people get into our organization, where are they? We don't know. And so that's why I emphasize that it is a really manual process to understand what is the population of justice impacted individuals who are in your organization and where are they. What I would highly recommend for academics who are desiring to really get into the data of an organization is, and I know this is going to be a heavy lift, is focus on one or two organizations where you can really get in and partner with their HR folks and help them work through the collection and automation of the data. A shotgun approach and trying to get a ton of detailed information for a variety of companies is an uphill battle, and I don't think that you'll make it. I don't think you'll make it up the hill.
Yeah, maybe I can echo that.
Please.
I was just going to move to you.
I think, just to echo that, it really does require almost a collaboration between the third-party background check company and the firm in order to put that data together. And by not having that data together always inside the firm, there's also potentially a lack of space for learning within the firm about, and just to echo your ideas, like exactly that, when we do hire somebody with a criminal record, how do they do in our firm, right? If we're not keeping that information, then we have no way of learning about this, no way of kind of expanding our access and thinking about how that's gonna work. That's part of what I've been doing with some work with Emma Rackstraw, who's sitting in the back, along with David Otter, one of our collaborators, is actually to work with one of these third-party background check companies and a firm where we can actually merge some of this data together and get a better idea of what's happening to both the productivity of individuals with records who are hired into this firm and the potential risk, the things that firms might be concerned about in terms of some kind of trust, safety, or other criminal violation. It's work that I won't be able to share the results with you yet. You'll have to kind of look out for that, hopefully in the next couple months. But it's exactly this kind of single firm collaboration that we're hoping to learn from. And the more that we can do this, the more that we can link this sort of criminal record information to actual employment outcomes, the more we can learn and help provide back to firms exactly the information that Jeffrey was talking about that we don't have, that says, well, here is what happens if we hire this type of individual into the company, because I think that that's exactly the information that firms don't always have a great grasp on. Where should I put that line, right? Whom should I hire, whom should I not? These may not be always empirically driven ways that firms are trying to do this exactly because the data is so lacking. So in some sense, I want to echo a lot of what Jeffrey and Stan just said, and almost like flip the original question that Marianne asked around, because we don't know a lot about what works. And that's part of what this conference is about. I can tell you some about what doesn't work, right, and what hasn't shown evidence of working. Right? I have worked with Dimitri Koustas, who's also here, along with some other co-authors, that shows that if you get rid of individuals' criminal records, 7 years later or something like that, that doesn't necessarily improve their employment outcomes, presumably because they've already been harmed by the existence of that criminal record for so long. So policies that expunge or erase criminal records several years later aren't necessarily going to help this particular group of individuals to gain access to employment. And so lots going on with clean slate policies. I think those are really well-intentioned, but may not really be the help that we need.
Or they could help with economic mobility, getting the next job once you're record, but we don't know.
That's the hope. I mean, that's the hope.
That's
we
the
haven't
hope,
seen
but we don't
evidence
know.
of that, right? And so in some of the research that we've done looking at individuals with criminal records and their employment outcomes through data that we could access from the IRS, we didn't see any evidence that getting rid of this information helped them gain the next job. But I think there's a lot more research to be done in this particular space. Damon spoke about ban-the-box policies. And while my research may have been about some of the unintended consequences due to employer stereotyping of individuals, Black individuals in particular who didn't have criminal records, he presented some data on kind of wage and employment. I think, was it from the NLSY? That data, okay, great. There's been data by others in the room, also Evan Rose, who I think is in the back, in Seattle, and other researchers in Boston, using kind of administrative data, linking individuals with criminal records to their employment records, that hasn't shown any large increases in employment for individuals who are directly impacted via ban-the-box policies. And so, maybe I will have to look more into the evidence from the NLSY, but we haven't seen big evidence that these sorts of things are actually improving employment outcomes for individuals with criminal records, even though my own research showed that it did increase callback rates for individuals with criminal records. So this comes back to the question about Rhode Island, right? So maybe this is actually helping people get their foot in the door, but there doesn't seem to be broad evidence yet that it's helping, at least in several jurisdictions, to actually increase employment, right? And it could be exactly this phenomenon that individuals are getting their foot in the door, but then as soon as the employer runs the background check, that stuff is going away. And so I think the problem is we don't know a lot about what works. We know some about what may not be working, but we need a lot more research on what does work and for whom, right? And what kinds of criminal records are employers reacting to? How are they reacting to those individual criminal records? The question I think was brought up in the back, that these criminal records are myriad. Like there's going to be some people that just have non-convictions on their record. There's going to be some people with only driving offenses that have led to criminal records. There's going to be some people with violence and theft, right? And all these things are very, very different in terms of how they're going to impact individuals' outcomes and how firms are going to react to them. And we know a lot less about that kind of differences as well. And so we don't know much, I think, academically yet about what works. I hope that this conference is going to help us learn more in the future.
So besides the research that we would all love to hear about that you cannot tell us anything about, is there anything else that, kind of you've been, any other kind of policies that you've been able to look at that may not require the firm level data that you're working on right now for?
Yeah, I think really it was just ban-the-box and these sorts of expungement policies, kind of clean slate, other sorts of. The Fair Credit Reporting Act is the other one that we were looking at, which prohibits the reporting of non-convictions after 7 years, and in some states prohibits the reporting of convictions after 7 years. Those are the sorts of policies that we were studying kind of outside of firm level data by looking at employment, just kind of like administrative data on whether individuals with records were employed. That's been the kind of, it's not even simple to do. It's not even simple to do that, right? But those have been the kinds of policies that we've been able to analyze thus far without the firm data. But I think getting into the firm data is really going to help us get to the nitty-gritty of what kind of firm level hiring policies are actually doing. And on top of that, what the actual outcomes that firms care about are. Firms care less about whether this individual is employed than whether they were a good employee, how long they stayed on the job, whether there was any risk factors involved with hiring this person. And that we can't answer with administrative employment data from the IRS or an employment insurance system. Then you really need the firm level data to get at what the firms directly care about.
So one more question for you, Amanda, before I move on, kind of the creating this partnership with employers to work with you and kind of to engage in this research that is so needed. So you clearly managed to create a partnership with one employer. Kind of, I'm guessing that you must have tried other employers before.
We tried lots.
And have faced a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
So we're in a room full of academics
Yeah.
and people that work in corporations. Is there anything that you could share about, kind of how we can make those partnerships work? Like, why did you succeed with this one firm? How can we do more of this going forward? Absolutely. Because I know, as we said, the other part of this conversation is segmentation. Yeah. We think that things are going to be very different from one firm to the other one, depending on the industry, consumer facing, the kind of people they're hiring. So tell us a bit more about this kind of academic for-profit partnership.
I mean, I think some of it comes from, I think, what Stan said about trying to find the business case. Right, trying to actually, you can't walk in there as an academic and say, well, I want to write a great paper to publish in a top journal, right? That's not, the firm's going to be like, well, I don't really care about your top journal publication, right? The question instead is, like, how can we help you find that untapped talent? How can we help you make the best hiring decisions possible? We can possibly do this with a collaboration. You have to find that champion within the firm who really wants this collaboration to happen. We have found several of those champions. Unfortunately, then there are, particularly the large corporations, which is kind of what came up before and came up at a conversation at our table, those sorts of efforts can sometimes be stymied because it gets to legal, and then they're like, no. Or it's not even a no necessarily, but kind of a, just kind of a ghosting. Like, we're just gonna, this is too much effort. Like, we're realizing that we actually don't have the data that you need in order to answer this question. And so rather than tell you that, or rather than try to put in the effort or help us put in the effort, there's just kind of a slow petering away of the process. And what's taken, to get to the firms that we've been able to work with, it usually really takes a kind of firm-wide desire to really be interested in this question about fair chance hiring, which of course then leads us to the question of what are we going to learn from this? I think we're going to learn something really important, but it's about a particular kind of firm who's really interested in pushing forward on fair chance hiring, right? What's it going to mean if we take their policies and practices to a firm who's more like, I don't know about this, right? That's going to be a lot harder of a challenge. And there's kind of no easy answer to how to help these collaborations happen. But if you are out there and excited about these sorts of questions and excited about this sort of collaboration, find some of the academics that are in this room. It doesn't have to be me, although I'd be happy to talk to you. And try to start forming those partnerships and those collaborations. Because I think also the more that firms do it and they see that it's okay and nothing terrible happened to them, and this research can get out there, the more you're going to get other firms on board who say, I want to do that too. I want to learn from my data, and I want to see what kind of lessons that we can take. I want to be a thought leader in this space.
Jeff, please go.
I'm actually in awe of kind of when they got this done. Because I've tried. There was a nonprofit in another city that tracked the outcomes of their clients, the people who had gone through the workforce readiness, and they had a phenomenal track record. Less than 1% recidivism and all sorts of great things, and they knew where they were employed. So I went to the head of the organization. I said, I had a great idea. We'll design a study, we'll reach out to the employers, and we'll ask them to compare their graduates of this program. And there was kind of a way of scaling it, numeric, and I'll get young professional resource group at my bank to do the follow-up calls to get the surveys filled out. He said, I don't want any of our graduates thought of as any different because they have a criminal record. And that's, well-intentioned, but you blew up. And so I'm just really impressed that this is going forward. But it takes work, as you know well.
Cool. Yeah, it was one of 20 or one of 30 firms that we attempted to work with.
So I think I've heard a lot about data, and I think I understand a bit better why it's not there, why it's hard to get. On the segmentation point, and maybe it's complicated because one of the other question we have here is like, what works for whom? We know we don't have much evidence, but I'm still going to push on segmentation, and I want to hear kind of whatever you have to say about that. So how do we think about the segmentation of the individuals, different kind of record? How do we think about differences between firms? One dimension that we've talked a lot about already is like firm size. Is there anything else that we should be thinking about?
Damon's very interesting presentation kind of made me think about this segregation issue, and perhaps one explanatory factor is if you're a wealthy business owner who lives in the suburbs of Chicago, you have absolutely no idea what life is like in neighborhoods in the south side or the west side. And so people with criminal records are so othered that I think it makes a greater resistance to wanting to change your internal policies and practices to accommodate that. I'm just thinking of some of the businesses in this room, and a lot of that are great fair chance employers. A lot of them, people were raised in cities. They understand the neighborhoods of those cities, and it's a different view of people with criminal records. So, don't know how that works into a study, but I think it's a very real factor. We talk about it as culture in the firms, but that's often driven from the top.
Can I just add to that? I think one of the other things that it's a stone in my shoe that I carry with me on this issue is a lot of times when we talk about justice impacted individuals, we're talking about individuals who may come from a low-income area or who are seeking low-income or entry-level jobs or manual positions. But let's make no mistake, there are a lot of high-income individuals who are justice impacted, who may be justice impacted while they're in a role in which they're making a lot of money. And so the one thing, as we talk about different populations, I would be very interested in seeing academic research that also touches on high-income roles and the difficulties that those individuals may face. And I'll give you a great example without going into great detail is, I know lawyers who have, they were justice impacted early on in their life, not their career, but just in their life. They've gone through their undergrad, they've gone through law school, they've clerked, they've done incredible work, and then when it's time to get their high-paying job at a big, huge firm, that is when that criminal record comes into play. And so what I would encourage people to think about is it's not just that entry-level job, it's not just that manual job, it's the complete stack of roles, it's the complete stack of income levels that should be analyzed.
There's a study out of Berkeley that basically I believe it might be a starting point for people, covers white-collar crime or crimes committed by white-collar professionals, and they actually have greater income drops percent, which you'd kind of expect, right, because it's the greater the fall. But there's so much more to learn.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about firm size. Presumably industry and occupation are going to be really important factors in terms of thinking about how firms are reacting to individuals with criminal records. And through this collaboration with one of these third-party background check companies, we can see a lot of variation across firms in the probability that they're actually kind of turning somebody down because of their criminal record, which is something that we want to better understand by looking at, okay, how does this vary by industry? How does it vary by occupation, right? How does it vary by the type of criminal record that the individual has, right? You're going to see a lot higher kind of adverse action rates, turning somebody down because of their criminal record for more violent crime than you are going to see for lower level property crimes or other kinds of public order crimes. And so I think thinking about this sort of industry and occupation variation might help us also better understand, why employers are reacting to certain criminal records in certain ways, right? One could imagine that in occupation that's going to be more customer facing, they're going to be more concerned about this reputational risk, right, that Stan brought up before. Even if the person is not going to do anything at all, is the customer going to react negatively to learning that they may have been interacting with somebody with a criminal record, right, which employers do seem to be quite concerned about. And so those kind of, how is that going to be differ from a stockroom job? How is that going to differ from a driving job, where presumably firms are going to be concerned about different types of criminal records? I don't think we have a lot yet of research on this question, but it's another form of segmentation that's going to be really important in addition to firm size.
Is that something that we can already document? Kind of like, say from these kind of background check companies, like could you go firm by firm and figure out this is the kind of like flagging that this kind of industry is doing or this kind of firm is doing? Can we do that at scale?
not hopefully soon.
Okay.
Look, we don't necessarily have the industry information within that data quite yet. The other place that we're trying to do that a little bit, I've been working with Lisa Kahn, who does a lot of work with job ad data. And so job ads will sometimes say something like background check required, or you must pass a background check in order to apply for this job. Right? Presumably in that sense, they're really highly signaling that they're going to be screening on this information. And so there we can get a better idea, okay, what is the industry distribution of the proportion of ads that say, hey, they're basically saying, hey, don't apply if you have a criminal record, right? They're not saying that because they can't say that, but they're essentially saying that. And and again, this is going to still be some preliminary research that we're doing, but there you can see that kind of significant variation where that's going to be really high in public administration jobs. And much lower in food service and accommodation jobs, which doesn't mean that those food service and accommodation jobs aren't doing background checks, right? But they're not necessarily trying to screen people out at the job ad stage. And so those kind of are two places that we're trying to push on to understand more of this segmentation by industry and occupation.
Let me throw out one quick factor. Maybe it'll pique someone's interest. I have no idea about this union, non-union. And I suspect it's there's some strong differences between unions themselves. But
between the unions, not just like kind of union on union, but like unions have different policies in terms of
policies or practices, right? And because a lot of this is never codified, but keeps on going.
Interesting. I know I only have 10 minutes left, and that means that I should open it to the room for questions. They're going to be much better than mine. So you go ahead, sir.
Yes, my name is Harris Ronagover from KD Distributors. I have a question for Stan about the manual process for gathering data. So this is something that we're facing right now where higher ups at KD are wanting to know, how many have you hired? What's the retention data? Are they outperforming people? Like, what's going on? Like, is the ROI there? And I'm sitting there saying, like, you got to give me a minute. But second of all, that our compliance team, quite frankly, is pretty slow on this because they're pulling everything manually, and the data that we normally have for hires that integrates with all of our data collection services and tools doesn't work for this. So I'm curious, is there a tool out there, or do you see something being developed, or if you could wave your magic wand and build something, what does the next, 5 years from now, are we still struggling with the same thing in terms of data collection and telling the story, or is there something happening that's going to make this process easier for employers? Because at a certain point, higher ups start asking, well, you're spending all this money on this, and you can't show me any data other than the number of people you've hired and whether they're still here. Right, and even then, they don't get specific names. They want stories, and so where do you see this going? Like, how does this end? But what's the next step?
Yeah, I don't see it particularly getting a lot easier or automated. I think a lot of external pressure was applied to underrepresented minority groups, and that's why you can automate that process. You can tell, like in your organization, okay, are women progressing? Are black people progressing in your organization? And I think a lot of companies have gotten around that because it's kind of I wouldn't say baseline, but we all kind of care about. Those are areas that we're monitoring. This particular population, I don't foresee in the very near term that there's going to be that degree of, we should really focus on this group. We should really make sure that they are progressing and track them at the same degree that we track women and underrepresented minorities. I think that's going to be a challenge. What I do think is important, and I can be combative in the workplace sometimes, and I'd encourage you to think about it a little bit, is I would say to leadership and the compliance team that there's no such thing as a free population of employees. It doesn't exist. When you think about what it takes to have university partnerships to pull in classes of interns, that's not free. When you think about the population of what it takes to pull in potential high potential talent at the corporate levels, that's not free. You pay recruiters to go out there and go do that work. When you think about the amount of advertising that employers do to make themselves seem as though they're employer of choice, whether it's in the form of awards that they're winning or consortiums that they're joining to really put their chest out there and say, we want to have the best talent, none of that is free. And so I just would ask you to weed that into your conversations with leaders to say, yeah, there's an investment here and there's an investment in every other avenue in which we bring in talent to the organization. If we want the best talent, we have to cast a wide net, and a market is not cornered where all the talent is in one place. We have to be strategic. We have to go invest in other ways to bring talent to the organization. If they can understand that, I don't know, but getting talent is just not a free exercise. It's not.
So just a quick follow-up. Is the best solution then to advocate for a resource within compliance that is specifically focused on untapped talent, and so that there's somebody who's dedicated full-time to measuring this data? Is that the best answer?
Yeah, I would say I think there's a balance, and Jeff, I welcome your perspective on this as well. I think there's a balance between internal and external investment. I don't think that corporations are naturally really, really good at attracting this population. I just don't think they are. And I think that the time that it would take for you to build that muscle internally could be better spent by working with a community-based organization that already has relationships with that population, that already knows the community, and can partner with you in bringing people into your organization. I think the one thing that we have to just keep clear, and I'm always really mindful of it, whether it's my time at Eaton or currently with at Intel, is that the mass majority of the population, they are skeptical of corporations. They're skeptical. And so you need someone to come in and advocate on your behalf and say, no, this is a good company. This is a good place to work. I can have people inside my organization do that, or I can invest and build partnerships and relationship with community-based organizations that will help me establish credibility with the individuals who I'm trying to help and bring into my organization.
I have nothing to add. I think what you're specifically asking, get an internal resource for the tracking, but I know I just have to give a shout out to KE. They started, like a year ago or less, and 10% of your new hires are Fair Chance now. Tremendous achievement, and they do it the right way, partnering with community-based organizations. So I thought that's tremendous. So thank you.
Oh, over here. Good morning. I feel I feel like an important part of the conversation when it comes to the data set is tracking or knowing what industry or what type of jobs justice impacted individuals are either attracted to or eligible for. And I feel that if, again, in the research, the data set, we have to expand and definitely include areas where, as you mentioned, middle organizations, maybe not Fortune 500s, but middle and community-based. But we have to track where they're going and what they're doing. And I want to make sure that we underscore what are they doing, because that then is what community-based organizations can say, I have a partnership with this corporation or this large business, and they're looking for skills, trades, again, by maybe education. So just to keep that top of mind to ensure that we are including in the conversation where also the path for them to go. Thank you.
So because this information is relevant when you think about kind of training people and preparing them for these jobs, is that the logic? I just want to make sure the logic is that this information is important because as a CBOs, you need this information to figure out what jobs to train people for and where to direct them towards.
Absolutely, I think and that's bridging the gap, because if I have an interest in maybe employing, for example, an automotive place, skilled trade, you could teach that. However, I can't teach perhaps that same person to be an accountant or an investment manager. So, but again, we know white collar crimes, depending on what the crime is and level of crime, but again, where are they going and how can they get there? So we have to be ensured, to your point, to make sure we can underscore that, because again, as community-based organizations, that's our connector to be able to move upward and downward.
That's super interesting.
I don't know if this is fair, but can we call on Megan Goddard?
Hey.
She's going to have some insight also into these questions about tracking. If you don't mind me kind of going out of order, I think you can actually even help us answer maybe two of these questions with some of the insights from the firms that you've worked with.
Alicia, thank you for this amazing conversation that seems to be happening. More so question. When asked about what is working, you mentioned talent pipeline development with CBOs and partnerships, which is wonderful, and I'm very appreciative of that because I work at a CBO. But I'm curious if you've had success with getting firms to change their screening criteria, and if so, how can you share that process of how you got them to be willing to do that? What kinds of crimes are they willing to be more open to? And do you look at the decision matrix? What do you look at to figure out what would be most impactful there?
Yeah, it was good to have the CEO's backing, because I just said, Craig said, change it. What we did was, because you had C-suite support, you could go to the HR and say, hey, we need to change this. And then you roll that out to some of your suppliers, particularly your temp agencies who are working for you, and say, hey, you need to have your standards consistent with ours. And so it makes things a lot easier. We always would use, both at E10 and also at Intel, we still use the green factors. And so what matters the most to me is if someone's background check, if there's something that hits, the question is, does it have any relationship whatsoever to the role that they're doing? And for me, if it doesn't, then let's keep moving along. It's not to include someone. The one thing that I'll say, and then I'll stop talking on this issue, and I know that others will be talking about the perception versus reality on risk later, is I've managed global litigation at a multinational, and now I'm responsible for business integrity at another multinational. It's not, it doesn't hit my desk. Like, I know people are really scared about it. I know there are a lot of legal departments that are the doctor knows, if you will. But for someone who when my phone rings, I have to answer it, that's not the call that I get.
I'm sorry.
With the firm that we have been working with to try to do some of this experimentation, what we started with presenting them with was some information from their own historical data on how individuals with records have done in terms of the outcomes that they care about, and then also some information on recidivism risk, kind of similar to what some of the stuff that Sean has done for individuals with different types of criminal records, as they were starting to think about where to push. How can we loosen this? How can we change this? How can we expand access? And I think, by then having them do that, hopefully, we'll present back to them whatever those results are, and then maybe they'll want to push a little bit farther. But it was kind of doing our best to provide some evidence, even though we didn't have all of the evidence that we wanted, about where they might be able to relax those barriers a little bit. And they weren't necessarily willing to do it with everything, right? Thinking back to the reputational risk, like even if we could tell them that an individual with a violent crime in the past is not very likely to recidivate, is not any more or less productive than in other individuals you have hired, they're so concerned about the reputational risk issue that there was really no budging on those sorts of crimes. And that's something that's a lot harder to bring research into. Like, it's hard for me to say, here's how you can protect against that. Maybe we need to start interviewing consumers or customers about what they're concerned about, when and why they might react to certain types of criminal records. And if I'm allowed to ask you, though, for 1 minute, about the tracking question, if you have any thoughts, only 1 minute. I know, I don't want to steal the time.
I appreciate that. I think what has been most impactful, our team works with employers as well to implement fair chance hiring strategies. And for the companies we have had success in the data tracking thing, it was what was mentioned earlier. How do you really understand the business value of the fair chance hiring initiatives? This particular company we had the most success with had a really big turnover problem for their entry-level roles. And they were digging into the details, and when they heard that fair chance hiring could be a solution to turnover, because folks like to stay at the jobs longer, they were really interested in tracking that. So we started there. But let's just track the impact on your turnover rate for this population compared to your general population. And there was a significant improvement. And that got them interested in, let's track more things. What else are we seeing here? I do think that the conversation is important to recognize that having a hypersensitive focus on whether or not justice-impacted individuals make better employees is maybe even a little bit too far. They are incredible hires, but so is the general population, and making sure that you're not continuing to separate themselves, because that also puts this hypervigilance on them. And what we've seen with some companies is when there's this hyper-focus, if they're underperforming, it might be that they're underperforming at the same rates as the general population, but there's more stigmatization there because, it's because they have a criminal record, which can also be damaging. So.
Okay, and I just want to add to your original question about how background check policies change. I just like to emphasize a lot of this is practice, not policy. You can have good policies, but if the perceived career incentives of the person making that decision, whether to include or exclude that application among candidates, are viewed as, I could be in trouble if something goes wrong, it's not going to happen. So middle market companies fix this by doing things like any questionable background where we otherwise like the candidate, a decision is made by an executive or a committee approach instead of a single individual. But the point to leave with is it's often comes down to a mid or low level manager making a decision and not perceiving any career incentives and lots of career disincentives to pass that along.
Good. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah. Thank you.